Radical religious movements often lead to tragic consequences. When people lose touch with reality and begin living in a world of their own fantasies, it can have catastrophic consequences not only for themselves but also for those who fall under their influence. The story that unfolded in a small Swedish town vividly demonstrates how dangerous such delusions can be. Sweden has always been known for its safety and low crime rate. The country is dotted with small towns, one of which is Knutby, a tiny settlement with a population of about 700 residents. It's such a small town that its entire infrastructure consists of one store, one restaurant, and a church. The remaining buildings are wooden houses of local residents scattered among the picturesque forest. It would seem that nothing bad could happen in such a cozy corner, but it was here that a story unfolded that surpassed many known criminal cases in its cruelty. The main character of this story is Helge Fossmo, who was born on July 27, 1971, in the town of Borlänge, located in central Sweden. He grew up in an ordinary family with 5 children, and, interestingly, his parents were not religious people. Usually, children inherit spiritual values from their parents, but in Helge's case, everything was different. His attraction to religion developed independently. At the age of 12, Helge joined a youth religious group in his town. His parents didn't interfere with this interest, believing that religious activity wasn't the worst choice for a teenager. Helge himself later said that it was then that his life gained real meaning. He became one of the most active participants in the religious community, despite his young age. 5 years later, in 1988, fate led him to work at a Christian youth cafe. It was there that he met his first love, Helen Johansson. The young people immediately felt mutual sympathy, and as soon as both came of age, they got married. During their life in Borlänge, they had 2 children, and Helge continued to deepen his religious knowledge, becoming a preacher of the local community. The turning point in the family's life came in 1993 when Asa Waldau appeared in their path, a woman who called herself the Bride of Christ. She was the leader of a Christian sect based in Knutby and traveled to cities in search of new followers. She was particularly interested in young people and teenagers, so the Fossmo family was perfect for her purposes. Helge's first meeting with Asa was quite tense. As a devoted Christian, he was skeptical about the idea of a female pastor and her radical interpretations of the Holy Scripture. He openly expressed his doubts about her teachings, especially when he realized he was dealing with a sect. However, Asa was persistent in her desire to involve the Fossmo family in her community. Over the next 4 years, from 1993 to 1997, she methodically worked to gain their trust. Gradually, she convinced Helge and his wife of the safety of her community while instilling in them her special vision of faith. Finally, her efforts were successful. The Fossmo family agreed not only to join her teaching but also to move to Knutby. Initially, this was presented as a simple friendly visit, during which Asa showed them the inner life of her church, detailed her work and goals. Over time, Asa's influence on the family grew stronger. She skillfully pointed out the shortcomings of the traditional church, which gradually sowed doubts in Helge's soul. Eventually, the family permanently moved to Knutby, where there was already a large religious community. Most of the town's residents were involved in various church activities, and the church, in turn, provided them with work. Each community member had their duties, mostly related to religious activities, which created a strong sense of unity and mutual support among the parishioners. Please subscribe to my channel, and I will bring you more videos featuring the most shocking true crime stories. Life in the religious community of Knutby quickly accepted Helge and his family. Local residents warmly welcomed the new preacher, who soon took the position of pastor in their church. However, his sermons began to take on an unusual character. He increasingly touched on taboo topics such as death and sexuality, interpreting them in quite ambiguous ways. Although such a radical approach to interpreting the Holy Scripture caused concern among some parishioners, Helge did not change his preaching style. 2 years after moving, the Fossmo family grew with a 3rd child. The increase in family responsibilities prompted them to seek help, and soon they hired a nanny, Sara Svensson, who had recently moved to the town, also captivated by Asa's teachings. Sara's story was full of personal tragedy. She grew up in a Christian family, but her childhood was overshadowed by severe allergies that significantly limited her life. The closest person to her was her mother, who selflessly cared for her daughter. The loss of her mother when Sara was 11 years old became a real tragedy for the girl. After her mother's death, Sara began to rebel, ran away from home. Her father, despite sincere attempts, couldn't give his daughter enough attention due to constant work commitments. Although they maintained warm relations, he couldn't fill the void after the loss of her mother. Sara's fateful meeting with Asa occurred at a Bible study session. The experienced preacher quickly recognized the young girl's vulnerability and skillfully used this, offering her a new spiritual family. Sara, searching for her path, decided to move to Knutby to be closer to the church and its charismatic leader. During this period, the relationship between Helge and Asa took on special intensity. They spent much time together, claiming to receive divine revelations. Helge carefully documented these prophecies in his diary, where he described visions and their interpretations. According to one such revelation, he was proclaimed the King of Kings, and Asa, the Queen of Heaven. Helge believed that his soul had existed since the beginning of the world's creation, waiting to meet an equal magnificent being, Asa. She, in turn, insisted on the necessity of their marriage, which was supposed to elevate their teaching to unprecedented heights. In 1999, they conducted a secret ceremony that was essentially a wedding. Helge gave Asa a ring with 7 diamonds, a number that has special sacred significance in many religions. All this happened despite Helge still being officially married to Helen. Naturally, this situation caused strong jealousy in Helen. However, Asa harshly criticized the legal wife's feelings, calling jealousy the greatest sin for a true Christian woman. She even threatened Helen with loss of housing if she didn't accept the situation. After the secret wedding, the relationship between Helge and Asa became even more overt. He almost completely stopped caring for his own family, giving all his time to his new, chosen one. Asa masterfully manipulated him through constant displays of love and approval, using intimate relationships as a tool of control. She convinced Helge that Jesus himself could speak through him. Their behavior became increasingly extravagant and incomprehensible to others. Neither Helen, nor the children, nor the parishioners could influence the situation that was becoming increasingly tense. Given Asa's difficult character, the tension continued to grow. In December 1999, illness swept through the town. Helge and Helen also fell ill and were forced to stay in bed. The main burden of caring for the family fell on Sara's shoulders, who miraculously avoided infection and continued to perform her duties as a nanny and housekeeper. Despite the illness, the Fossmo couple tried to maintain their usual rhythm of life. On the morning of December 18, 1999, when the illness was already subsiding, although both still felt weak, they had breakfast together. After breakfast, Helge, still exhausted, decided to rest. He was awakened by a knock on the door. It was a concerned neighbor who came to check on the couple, having not heard from them throughout the day. Helge opened the door and assured him that everything was fine, but the neighbor insisted on seeing Helen as well. She was nowhere to be seen, although she was supposed to be at home. Helge suggested that his wife had gone to take a shower. Concerned about Helen's prolonged absence, the men decided to check the bathroom. When no one answered their calls, they broke the lock with a simple screwdriver. The horrific scene that opened before their eyes was forever etched in the memory of those present. Helen was lying face down in the filled bathtub, still wearing the nightgown she had worn at breakfast. Helge's scream attracted the attention of other neighbors. Together, they pulled the body from the water and tried to resuscitate the woman, but it was too late. Helen died at the age of 27. The investigation revealed disturbing details. The deceased had a serious head injury, which by itself could have been fatal. According to the medical examiner's conclusion, death could have resulted from a combination of factors. The head trauma could have led to loss of consciousness, which caused drowning. However, the most alarming was the result of the toxicological examination. A lethal dose of opioids was found in Helen's blood, although the woman had not been taking such medications. Despite the suspicious circumstances, law enforcement classified the death as an accident, largely relying on Sara's testimony, which confirmed the pastor's version that Helen was alone in the bathroom. An important role in closing the case was also played by the fact that Helge was a respected community member and local pastor, which gave his version of events additional weight in the eyes of the investigation. Helge's behavior after his wife's death aroused suspicion in those who knew him better. He quickly disposed of all Helen's belongings and forbade the children to mention their mother. His actions regarding the autopsy results drew particular attention. Initially, he tried to prevent it altogether, citing religious beliefs, and then insisted on removing information about opioids from the report, arguing this was out of concern for the deceased's reputation and her ability to enter heaven. After Helen's death, the relationship between Helge and Asa unexpectedly ended. She left for another pilgrimage and didn't return. However, her influence on the pastor remained unchanged. He was determined to continue the activities. Quite quickly, Helge found new love, Alexandra Waldau, Asa's sister. Their relationship developed rapidly, facilitated by Helge's high status in the religious community. In spring 2000, Alexandra moved into his house, and soon they married. However, this marriage didn't bring stability either. By spring 2001, Helge began showing special interest in Sara Svensson, who was still working as his children's nanny. Notably, this relationship received Asa Waldau's blessing, despite the fact that Helge was married to her sister Alexandra at the time. Helge skillfully manipulated Sara's trust, often inviting her to joint prayers at the church. He convinced the girl that their closeness was purely spiritual, presenting their meetings as a special way of transmitting messages to God, rather than an expression of physical attraction. Sara was so captivated by Helge that she unquestioningly believed all his stories about the divine purpose of their relationship. According to her own words, she felt special spiritual elevation during their meetings. In reality, the girl had fallen into the trap of a skilled manipulator who was covering his true intentions with religious motives. Over time, Helge's sermons took on an increasingly disturbing character. He began speaking of himself as a warrior of the Lord who fights earthly battles, hinting at the need to remove obstacles from his path. The naive Sara perceived these mysterious messages as sacred revelations, not suspecting the pastor's true intentions. Later, Helge began claiming that he received messages from God during prayers with his second wife Alexandra. According to his interpretation, these signs indicated that Alexandra should leave this world. Simultaneously, he convinced Sara that she was his perfect match, chosen by the Lord. He also manipulated fear, suggesting that he might die if he didn't end his marriage with Alexandra. Using his authority in the church and knowledge of Sara's vulnerabilities, Helge methodically strengthened his control over her. He adopted many manipulation techniques from Asa. He convinced Sara to move into his house, where he already lived with Alexandra, justifying this as necessary to fight demons. By 2003, the psychological manipulation reached its peak. Helge treated Sara cruelly, sometimes insulting her, calling her a sinner and an arrogant blonde, then ending his tirades with the words, "I love you." Sara was so desperate to hear these three words that she was willing to endure any humiliation. Helge repeatedly asked Sara if she was ready to kill in the name of the Lord. Although she initially refused, her resistance gradually weakened. Then the pastor resorted to new tactics. He created a fake messenger account and began sending Sara messages, allegedly from God himself. In these messages, God ordered Sara to commit murder by November 25, claiming this was the only path to her salvation. When Sara suspected Helge was behind this, he strongly denied his involvement and accused her of lack of faith, which worked again. The manipulation achieved its goal. On the night of November 8, 2003, Sara, driven by fear for her own soul and convinced of the divine nature of her task, carried out an attack on Alexandra. Armed with a hammer, she burst into the pastor's second wife's bedroom. Alexandra miraculously managed to survive, fighting off the attacker. The motive for this horrible act was another message that Sara had received from God through the messenger. Following the received instructions, the preacher ordered the woman to carry out an immediate attack on the pastor's wife with a clear intention to take her life. Investigation of the case revealed an amazing fact: the perpetrator of this attack did not receive proper punishment. This was due to Helge's insistence not to inform law enforcement about the incident. Further verification confirmed, no records of this event remained in police archives. The only consequence of this incident was that the preacher sent the nanny to live with her father for the rest of her life. However, this decision did not stop the flow of messages that Sara continued to receive. These messages constantly convinced her of the necessity of murder, only intensifying her obsessive condition. The church minister didn't remain alone for long. Soon he began a romantic relationship with neighbor Annette Lind, who was married to Daniel at the time. Wanting to remove the obstacle in the form of her husband, the pastor revived his manipulation scheme, sending Sara messages following the already tested scenario. The psychological pressure proved effective again. Seeking spiritual salvation, Sara agreed to take up arms. Helge continued to fully control his former lover, turning her into an obedient executor of his will. After the failed first attempt to carry out the divine plan, Sara received a second chance. This time she prepared more thoroughly, purchased a firearm and searched the internet for instructions on making a homemade silencer, diligently following all instructions she believed to be divine guidance. On January 10, 2014, events unfolded rapidly. Sara took her father's car and, maintaining contact with Helge, arrived in his neighborhood at 3:30 a.m. Importantly, 23-year-old Alexandra was still living in the pastor's house. Sara parked 500 meters from the target house. To conceal her identity, she wore a black mask and shoes of different sizes to complicate the investigation. Over the shoes, she pulled tight bags to avoid leaving traces. The front door of the Fossmo house was open. The organizer had previously damaged the lock, simulating a burglary. Alexandra was sleeping when Sara entered her room. The first shot hit her thigh, and when the victim woke up screaming, the second shot to the head was fatal. At 4:30 a.m., the perpetrator headed to her second target, Daniel, the husband of the pastor's new lover, who, as Helge had informed, was home alone. Although the door was locked, Sara simply knocked. When 30-year-old Daniel opened it, she shot him in the chest without hesitation, then in the head. Fleeing the crime scene, she didn't know that the second victim had survived. Daniel managed to call for help and even provide a description of the attacker to law enforcement. 32-year-old Helge quickly appeared at the scene, pretending to be a concerned neighbor. He even accompanied the wounded Daniel to the hospital, where he learned about his own wife's death, masterfully playing the role of a grief-stricken husband. Although the initial description of the attacker proved inaccurate due to the mask, suspicions gradually focused on Helge and Sara. One neighbor recalled the suspicious death of the pastor's first wife, and information surfaced about the previous hammer attack on Alexandra, from which she had miraculously escaped. Bloody fingerprints at the scene of Alexandra's murder and on Daniel's door became irrefutable evidence of Sara's involvement. The 26-year-old nanny was arrested. Initially, she insisted on acting independently, then claimed she was acting on divine command. During the search, police seized her phone with Helge's contacts and an unknown subscriber. Although the correspondence with the divine source wasn't found initially, detectives discovered a call from Sara's old number. Investigators also found that Helge used special software to send SMS messages from a computer, allowing him to mask the true source of the messages. A further search of her residence revealed a second mobile phone containing extensive correspondence with God, over 1,000 messages with persistent demands to commit murder. Tracing the unknown number, investigators established it belonged to the local pastor. When Sara learned about this, she was stunned, as she had sincerely believed in the divine origin of these messages. After this discovery, she fully confessed to the police about all details of the case. The resolution of this chilling story unfolded gradually. Annette Lind, the wife of the wounded Daniel, initially fell under suspicion as a possible accomplice but was released after 2 weeks due to lack of evidence of her involvement in the crime. The trial of Helge Fossmo began in July 2004. Throughout the hearings, he showed arrogance and categorically denied his guilt. Psychiatric evaluation found him fully competent. The prosecution presented convincing evidence of his guilt in inciting the murder of Alexandra and the attempted murder of Daniel. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 24 years. Although Fossmo was also suspected of involvement in his first wife's death, these charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, though the prosecution remained convinced of his involvement. While in prison, he married for the third time in 2007, his new wife's identity is not disclosed. An unexpected turn came in August 2006 when, during an interview, Fossmo finally admitted his involvement in the crimes against Alexandra and Daniel, hinting at the participation of others, but the case was not reopened. He is currently serving his sentence in the maximum security Tidaholm prison. The case took a new turn after discrepancies were discovered in the video reconstruction of the crime. There were 2 versions, one edited for court and the original 6-hour version. The reconstruction details didn't match the actual circumstances of the crime, and Sara in subsequent interviews adhered to this inaccurate version. This raised doubts about the true course of events and the pastor's possible direct involvement in the murders. Sara Svensson was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent for compulsory treatment to a psychiatric facility. During her hospital stay, she underwent intensive psychotherapy, which helped her understand the extent of the manipulation she had been subjected to. In 2011, after completing treatment, she was deemed safe for society and released. She later changed her surname and completely distanced herself from church activities. Daniel, who survived the attack, refused to return to Knutby due to fear of the local religious community. In 2020, sect leader Asa Waldau was sentenced to community service for attacks on former parishioners. The investigation also revealed other crimes in the religious community. In particular, Pastor Urban Field was convicted of sexual exploitation of dependent persons. He established intimate relationships with women in the congregation, calling them his daughters and manipulating them. This story shocked Swedish society with the scale of manipulation and abuse of religious influence, becoming one of the most notorious criminal cases in the country's history. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case. If you enjoy deep dives into true crime, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, friends.